All right, then, ready to get started?
Sure.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Angie Hopkins, and I'm the current bylaws chair. And I wanted to start by just making sure everyone knows who's on the bylaws committee and who's been working on it. So in addition to myself, it's Sally Butts, who actually started this whole process. Larry Conroy, Joe Gunther, Larry Kanapka. So this process, I was just reminded, actually started back in the fall of 2018. And Claudia, can you advance the slide, please?
Sure.
So the bylaws committee, as part of the defined duties, actually requires us to review them at least every 5 years, which is why we started looking at this early last year. As is noted here, that's customary from just a good governance perspective. We actually consulted with various committees as needed to determine what changes they recommended. We also made changes to reflect current operations, how things are actually done day to day, and importantly, to provide consistency with the standing rules. And then there are many grammatical and editorial issues that we found as we went through these. And as we go through each article, that we will actually give the rationale for the changes in that article. So for Articles 1 through 3, there are no changes. So we just wanted to make sure and confirm that for you and let you know. And then I'm going to hand over to Larry Conroy for the next articles.
Angie, before you do, you want to go over some ground rules for?
Oh, yes. I'm
questions?
sorry. Yeah, as far as questions, we think it'll be much easier if you reserve all the questions till the end, and then we'll try to address all the questions in each article at the same time. So when we get to Article 4, we will look at all those questions at the same time. If for some reason we don't have time to get to a question, we'll either stay after online and address that, or we can address your question via email or on the phone. We can follow up with you. Okay.
All right, turning it over to me. Hi, folks. How are you this afternoon? I'm going to be reviewing Articles 4, 5, and 6. I'm going to briefly describe the intent of the article, the rationale for changes, and then we'll get into the actual red lines so you can see what we actually did with each article. So Article 4 is membership. Article 4 is all about membership. It discusses the application process and club acceptance and the different membership classifications. The membership committee was asked to review this article, I guess, late last year, and they spent, the past several months doing so. They suggested minimal changes to Article 4. The changes they did make were made so that the bylaws were in sync with current real procedures, and also to make the language more consistent in regards to Article 4C, 2C, and you guys will see that when we get to the red lines. In addition, the language regarding medical hardship leave of absence will be removed and added to the club standing rules. And then other minor grammatical changes have also been made. So we're going to move to the red lines, Claudia. There we go. Okay. So the rationale is kind of what we just went through. Let's now get into the actual red lines. So starting in 4A, and throughout the entire article, we've capitalized the word member. The word downloadable was changed to downloaded. Completed applications are currently submitted to the member operations chair, not the secretary. So to make sure we're doing what real world activities are, we made that change to the member operations chair instead of to the secretary. Moving down to 4B. Claudia, thank you. So in the past, each application was posted in the clubhouse for 7 days. Obviously, we haven't done that for many years. The procedure is no longer followed. So instead, a list of applicants is posted at the club. So the language has changed to reflect the current procedures. Regarding club acceptance, applicants are deemed to be accepted into the club once notified by the member operations chair, not upon receipt of receiving their membership card. So that change was made as well. 4C, 2C, that's still up there, good. So the language for junior members moving to full membership has been changed to show that they can do so by March 1st following their 21st birthday. This change was made to sync up with the current process for intermediate members moving to full, and that's shown in 4C 3D. So moving Claudia down to 4C6, next slide.
Next slide. Okay.
Thank you. All right, so 4C6 and 4H, the language for leave of absence is moving to the standing rules. So Article 4H goes away, and the reference to 4H in 4C6 will now refer to the standing rules. Also, the line right under in 6, basically that last line that says, except as specified in item 2 above, somehow in past years that, you know, just erroneously got added into the bylaws. It doesn't refer to anything. So that is just being deleted. So that's it for Article 4. Moving to Article 5. Article 5 identifies the officer positions of our club and the eligibility requirements for those positions. Proposed changes to this article are also very minimal. The language regarding flag officer vacancy, Article 5F, will be removed and incorporated into Article 6. And then let's move to the red lines. Thank you. Rationale is just what we talked about. So the red lines itself, 5A, the words "who are the executive officers of the club" have been added after the flag officers. And then you really can't see it in here, but there were hyphens between Vice Commodore and Rear Commodore. We just got rid of the hyphens. 5B and C, the word member has been capitalized. In 5E, we just did some wordsmithing here. So we removed the word office and changing the words resignation submitted to the word notice. And then 5F, the language for how vacancies of flag officers are filled is being removed from Article 5 and will now be covered in Article 6, which we will get to next. All right, so moving to Article 6, duties of the flag officers. Article 6 defines the duties of each of our flag officers. As mentioned in this article, it's important to note that these duties may be delegated and or dispersed to appropriate committees and individuals. Proposed changes to this article concern the procedure for filling flag officers' vacancies. In addition, the duties for both the Vice Commodore and Rear Commodore have been expanded. Also, Article 12 regarding employees will be removed from the bylaws and instead incorporated into Article 6. And finally, the requirement for the treasurer to furnish bond has been removed and moved to the club's overall insurance. All right, so now we're going to get into the actual red lines. We've already gone over the rationale, so we'll go to the next slide. Okay, under 6A, we started with some wordsmithing and showing that the Commodore shall appoint committee chairs instead of their respective chairmen. The next changes are regarding how vacancies are filled for the secretary, treasurer, or Rear Commodore. Article 5S, F has said that the vacancies will be filled by appointment of the board. We are proposing that the Commodore be responsible for appointing a member as acting secretary, treasurer, or Rear Commodore for the remainder of the vacant term subsequent to board approval. So that's 6A. Moving to 6B, additional duties have been added to the Vice Commodore's role, including be responsible for the ship store and co-chairman of the House Committee. The next line, the Vice Commodore shall be responsible for the interviewing, hiring, and supervising of all club employees, was taken from Article 12. We felt it more appropriate to be added here to Article 6 since it discusses the Vice Commodore's duties. We did remove from Article 12 the involvement of the board in the hiring process, as we felt it was to be in the purview of the Vice Commodore to do those responsibilities. And moving to C, 6C, again, hyphens, same thing. We had hyphens between Rear Commodore and Vice Commodore. Those have just been removed. Then we did some wordsmithing for the financial terms regarding the Monday night dinners. Additional duties were then added to the Rear Commodore's role, including chairing the Waterfront Committee and co-chairing the House Committee. And finally, the succession plan is discussed if the Vice Commodore's role is vacated. And then we'll go down to 6D, which will be the next slide. So only grammatical and punctuation changes were made here to the secretary's duty. And again, it's important to note, you'll see a lot of stuff for the secretary, you see a lot of stuff for the treasurer. They have a lot of responsibilities, but those duties can be delegated or dispersed to appropriate committees and different individuals to make sure that those responsibilities are completed. Moving to 6E, treasurer, again, primarily grammatical and punctuation changes were made here. The requirement for the treasurer to furnish bond has been removed, and instead we're referring this to the club's risk management committee for review. If required, the risk management committee will propose a new standing rule to the board to ensure that this issue is covered. And so that kind of covers Article 4, 5, and 6. And then we'll move it to Sally. I believe you're taking number 7.
Correct. So Article 7 is annual meetings historically, but we added special meetings to the title of this because the language in this article included special meetings. Voting, we added, oh, can we go back?
Sorry.
We added voting before member so that it is apparent that all the members voting are actual voting members. And then we also put holder inserted after proxy, so it was clear that it was a proxy holder. We removed approved minutes being distributed at the next annual meeting because we no longer do that, and approved minutes of the annual meeting are posted on the website. And once again, like other articles, this is to be consistent with the current way we're doing things. And mostly other changes are just grammatical. So we can go to the next slide. The rationale, I already went through that. As you can see, we did some, capitalizing of members. Next slide, please. No changes to be other than capitalizing and those couple of changes I did. And once again, C kind of describes the process for a special meeting. And we just kind of did a little bit of wordsmithing here. And then we removed 20% of voting members in good standing, and we removed of the club upon written request submitted to the secretary, and we just added upon written request at the beginning of the sentence instead of kind of at the end of the sentence. No change to D. And then once again, you can see how we capitalized member and added voting member. And really that's it. So it's mostly wordsmithing on this particular article, other than matching up the operations at the beginning. So we can go to the next one. Yeah, and I think this is Angie, right?
Yes. Okay, with Article 8, we have several just minor editorial revisions. The last two sentences of 8B were deleted because they were related particularly to disciplinary procedures, which are more fully set forth in the standing rules, so they should be addressed there. In 8C, the section that says or other flag officer acting in Commodore's office was removed to be consistent with Article 6, which already allows for delegation of duties, which Larry already talked about. In the words, or at least 20% of members of the club was removed because Article 7C already provides for the special meetings to be called by 20% of the club. So again, that was redundant here. And 8C, the words advance notice shall be given to all directors except in the case of emergency was deleted because the notice of these meetings is addressed in the duties of the secretary specifically. So again, was redundant here. You can go to the next slide. Paragraph 8E regarded the appointment of honorary officers, and that was deleted for consistency with current practices. The new paragraph 8F that was added last year was just expanded to include more detailed description of those executive session topics. And finally, the last paragraph in 8F was deleted because, again, it dealt with disciplinary procedures and they're more fully set forth in the standing rules. So we can move on, and that's the same rationale that we just went through. Next slide. As you can see in A, that is just editorial revisions and wordsmithing a little bit. 8B, we added requirements of the bylaws and the standing rules of the club, and then that deletion, which related specifically to a disciplinary procedure, will be addressed in the standing rules. Next slide. This was the deletion of the or other flag officer because it's dealt with in another section, and then we just added video conference to the way, again, some wordsmithing to the way that meetings are held. And then E is the deletion about honorary officers to be consistent with current practices. And then E, what is now E, was F, are really just editorial changes, capitalization. You can go to the next slide. And then F is the more detailed description of the executive session topics. And I think that does it. That yeah, the delete, yeah. There you go. I think that was everything. Yeah. And 9 gets passed off to, I think, Sally.
Sally. Yeah. Okay, Article 9 goes over dues, fees, and assessments. The last sentence in Article 9A referencing board's authority to extend payment of dues due to illness is deleted because this is outlined in the standing rules. And we note where those standing rules are. The board essentially delegates these actions to a majority of flag officers. And then we deleted the last sentence where the board of directors establishes initiation fees, which is now addressed in standing rules under club operations, rules E, dues, fees, and assessments. And then the remainder of changes are really grammatical. So we can go to the next slide. And that's what I just kind of discussed. So you can see how we removed under A, the board has authority to extend the dates for payments, and we addressed how that has been changed. B, there's no changes other than capitalizing members. Assessments is once again grammatical exclusively. So standing committees has been deleted because last year we approved standing committees be moved out of bylaws and now are a separate listing or item in the yearbook, and you could see more detail about those. Next slide.
Hold on. Okay.
And 11 has the same thing because since we removed the standing committees from the bylaws, we also removed their the duties of the committees, and they're once again a separate item in the yearbook that can be referenced. Next slide. And this just shows you how that is illustrated in the redlined document. Next slide. The 12 has been deleted and the contents are incorporated into Article 6. Let's see. I guess, Larry, you're doing that.
Yeah, that's fine. Article 13 becomes Article 10. And then, Sally, can you explain the red line versions? It showed we made changes, but we're going back to the way it currently is, correct?
Yes, and we apologize for any confusion on that, but we wanted to make sure that what we were doing in this presentation was consistent with the red line version that you were seeing on the website, or that was also gave you a link to the red line version in the signal flags. So we are not making any changes to that article.
So Articles 13 stays the same, and I believe Article 14, next slide, that now becomes Article 11, and no changes to that article. Back to you, Sally.
Okay. So Article 15 now becomes Article 12, and it's titled Amendments, and it addresses notification of bylaws changes to members. So we deleted a copy of the proposed bylaw changes as mailed to members, and I'm sure all you can appreciate that we're not going to, mail every member this entire document. So what we've done is we've made the changes on the red line version to match up with what we're currently doing, which is bylaw changes are posted and a summary of the proposed changes will be mailed to members with the ballots prior to the annual meeting. So once again, the entire document is not going to be mailed. And the entire proposed changes, as I mentioned, are posted on the website prior to the annual meeting. Okay. And really that's what this just explains. In A, it just says, here's how we do it. And so we made those changes to match up with that, with current operations. Next slide. And there were no changes to that one. B. Okay. I think this is,
Angie? No?
yeah.
Yeah, I think so, yes. The old Article 16 now becomes number 13, and there are no changes to it. It just deals with procedure and parliamentary authority, the fact that we're following the Roberts Rules of Order. So no changes were made to that other than the number of the article. And then the next slide, please. Indemnification, formerly 17, now becomes 14. And really, all we really did is expand this to more fully reflect the club's agreement to indemnify its board, officers, and club members who are named as a party to a lawsuit, provided the named person was acting within the scope of the bylaws and standing rules pursuant to a matter approved by an action of the board and acting in good faith and in a manner reasonably believed to be for the benefit of the club. That really existed before, but this just more fully makes it more specific. If you want to move to the next slide and it will show. And then really it's a lot of legalese. So I don't know that you want me to go through the whole thing, but you can see that the changes are based upon what I just did from a rationale perspective. We also added the paragraph that says the indemnification continues as to a person who has ceased to be a director, because if the event that's the matter of the lawsuit happened before a person may be moved out of a role, it still should cover them. And then also we added the paragraph that the club can also provide indemnification and advancement of expenses to other volunteers and agents as described here if they choose to. I think it moves on to Larry Konopka.
Yes, this is Larry Konopka. Article 18 has been deleted in its entirety because throughout our bylaws and in other places in the standing rules, we've made over the years various references to disciplinary procedures actions or violations that could lead to discipline, and then the method for dealing with an accusation of a violation. And we thought rather than to have it scattered throughout, we would pull it together in the standing rules, because now we have an etiquette policy, we have other rules and regulations which could be inadvertently or intentionally violated. And we thought to have it in the standing rules not only makes it more understandable, but makes it more possible to have a speedy resolution should one of those problems come up at a later date. And so we don't need to have any reference to this material in the bylaws any longer. Next slide, please. Article 19, now to be called 15, is club ownership and dissolution. We had to change the wording in order to have it comply with the way the club is actually set up and the way the club would be legally responsible for dispersing money in the event that the club was ever dissolved. Next slide, please. The new wording makes it clear that our club is owned by the Pentwater Yacht Club, a Michigan non-for-profit corporation. If we weren't incorporated, then of course we would not need to refer to the corporation. But since the club has been incorporated for many years, it is the owner of our club. However, the corporation is owned by the club's voting members in good standing. And so they do have an interest in the ownership of the club, but it's indirect rather than direct. And then lastly, in the event that the club would ever have a need or a mandate that it had to dissolve, the voting members by 2/3 can approve at an annual or special meeting the dissolution of the club, a sad day that we hope would never come. And then the financial proceeds of the dissolution cannot be distributed to the owners. It would have to be distributed according to Michigan law for non-for-profit corporations. So things like taxes, employee wages, secured creditors, unsecured creditors, there would be a whole pecking order of who got paid how much and when. And so rather than to try to bring all of that legal material into the bylaw, we've just merely stated that it would have to comply with Michigan law as then set up for non-for-profit corporations. And that would be the final bylaw to be addressed in this brief discussion.
Okay. So with respect to questions, I guess we'll open it up. And again, as I said, we want to do them according to each article so that we can keep them together. I guess I would start by saying, are there any questions on Article 4?
Doesn't sound like it.
Okay, Article 5.
Ooh.
Angie?
Yeah,
Yeah.
hang on a second. Let's make sure everybody's unmuted.
Oh. Angie, I don't have a question on Article 4. I just wanted to comment that I think it's logical, and to make the changes we're talking about, besides grammar and wordsmithing, that seems kind of like a no-brainer. So I appreciate somebody taking the time. I know it's tedious, so that'll be extremely helpful for us in the future. I think the small changes and subtle things you're altering are going to make us more efficient. It's a better flow, and I think it sounds spot on.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much.
Dennis Rowley is here and he has a question.
On Article 5 or another
Yes,
article?
On
On Article
Article 5.
Okay, Larry, you want to take that?
What is the difference between a flag officer and an executive officer?
I think the flag officers are the executive officers of the club.
Why do we use the term executive officer?
I'm going to let Larry Konopka or another attorney on our group, Angie, get that one, Larry?
Yes, this is Larry Kay. Dennis, flag officers actually wear two hats in our club. They are flag officers of the club, but they are also board members. And so I think it's important, if you have a smaller group of people taking action for whatever reason, they've got to distinguish between whether they are acting as part of a board authority or a board decision, or whether they're acting as a smaller group, i.e. the executive officers of the club, who after all are running the day-to-day functioning of quite a complex organization. And so they are carrying out the executive privileges and responsibilities that are described in the later article that tells about their duties. And so we wanted to make it clear that the flag officers, when they're acting in that capacity, are executive officers and that they're not acting as board members.
We have 5 flag officers and 5 executive officers.
They are one and the same.
They are one and the same. Okay. I just wondered, it seemed like a corporate term was coming into a yacht club environment. And if the term flag officer is slowly going to be disappearing, and that we call the 5 leading officers executive officers all the time. Why is it?
There will be places, Dennis, in either the bylaws or the standing rules where they have to make here and now decisions. And so we will be referring in those other instances to them acting in the capacity as executive officers, again, to distinguish that they're not acting as a smaller sub-board or a committee of the board or a faction of the board, but they're acting as executive officers of the club who are responsible for the day-to-day functioning of that club.
Okay. I don't see the difference really, but all right. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Dennis.
Any other questions on Article 5? If not, we'll move on to Article 6, duties of the flag officers.
Yes, I have a couple questions on Article 6, if I may.
Sure.
2 sections, B, the Vice Commodore, and I understand the interviewing and hiring and supervising of all employees being moved there, because that's what they do. But after listening to your comments today, I was wondering about the high office of the manager, I believe was approved by the board. So I don't know if that needs to be the exception in that article, that position comes to the board for approval. So that's a suggestion. And then the second one relates to C. Sorry, I actually have 2 more. Item C, where it talks about Monday night dinners, and I already shared this with Sally earlier, that should be member dinners, because if you look at it right now, we're violating our bylaws because we moved them from Thursday to Monday.
Yeah.
And what if the next rear Commodore comes in and they want it on Wednesday? They'd be violating the bylaws. So it should be listed as member dinner as opposed to the specific date of that. And then the last one, and also because we talked about all the chairs of the various committees, Vice Commodore with the House Committee and the Rear Commodore with those committees. And Sally explained to me that in the strategic plan or standing rules, I can't remember which one they talk about,
It's
that
strategic,
flag
yeah,
office
strategic plan.
should be a co-chair to various committees. And so the Finance Committee, which is chaired by Dave Nobles, which does a fantastic job, and before that was Rita Grants, who did a fantastic job. But I would think it would make sense that the treasurer then would be co-chair of the Finance Committee if that's the practice or the reason for the other committees having a flag officer be co-chair of those committees. Thanks.
Okay, we'll take those and review those. We have a meeting
Excellent.
tomorrow. We'll talk about them in more depth.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
Bill Payton, and I was actually going to agree with Kathy on both counts, that the secretary should be more involved with the finance committee on the job description. I'm sorry, the treasurer. And the Monday night dinners, again, should be member dinners in light of what the change was this year.
I agree. Thanks, Bill.
Hey, Larry, on the Kathy's point about the vice commodore, when we do have a general manager that is essentially in charge of hiring, seeking, finding people, could the commodore's language be something like shall assist the general manager or shall be responsible for leading the effort? I would just alter the language somewhat, because it's actually, that's now kind of Jordan's job. The vice commodore is responsible, but I think I'd alter
Well,
that language somewhat.
It
Maybe.
says the vice commodore shall be responsible for interviewing, hiring, and supervising all club employees. I don't think we can give that to a general manager to do so. So he's still responsible for that. He oversees that. If
Okay.
that's what the general manager does under his delegation, I think that's okay.
Right.
I agree 100% with Larry, because right now we have a very good club manager. There have been years when it has been less so.
Okay.
Okay. I want to move on to Article 7. Any questions?
I think I had one. Can you call up the next slide with the maybe one more with the voting members. When we read this, and I don't know where, maybe it's not this article. I thought my note was Article 7, but I think it's the next article. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Nope, it's right there. A special meeting by 21% of the voting members. Is there a reason to say voting members, or should that say of the general membership?
Well, we changed it to voting because certain members, like junior members, do not vote. So that's just the reason we said, but it is essentially the same thing. They're general members, but we just wanted to specify that it is a voting member.
Because that voting member is in there twice, and I think the only clarification that I had in mind was clarifying a voting member versus a board member. General members can't conduct regular business of the club. The board members conduct the regular members of the club. I don't know if there needs to be a separation or clarification in that regard.
Okay. So say that one more time. Sorry, Bill.
I was just wondering about clarifying voting members, general members versus the board members, because the board conducts the general business of the club, not the whole membership, but the 20% of the general membership is what we're looking at for a special meeting. And then I think that came up somewhere on down the line too, where it talked about voting members again. And I don't know if there needs to be a clarification or not on when those references are made, that it's to the general membership. And I understand the difference, excluding the intermediate who are non-voting, but doesn't that say that in the categories of membership, the junior and intermediate are non-voting?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
So I think when we say general membership, except as excluded or something like that, versus, and I may be wrong, I may be totally off in left field on that, but
Okay, well, Well, I've made a note and we'll take a look at it for sure. But you bring up a good question.
Okay, I just, like I said, wanted to clarify that that is a right of all the members, not
Yes.
just the board and things like that.
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
20%.
Thank you.
Okay. Then we'll move on to Article 8. Any questions?
Yes, I have a question or a comment more or less on Article 8.
Okay, Kathy?
And it goes to the, and I shared this with Sally ahead of time also, but the adding the areas to go into executive session, so I think it's the new F. I just, even though I am currently one of the people who would be going into executive session, that's just pretty, opens it up more than I've ever seen in any organization. And I realize they can't vote. It's just for executive session, but I think in the climate that we're in right now, and these bylaws, have been here 85 years or hopefully go 85 years forward. And they won't be, totally reviewed again for the next 5 years, that I just think this is the wrong time to add privileges to go into executive session. Cleaning up some of the language is okay, but to add accountants, architects, engineers, that's, I think expands it more than it should right now. That's all. Personal opinion.
Sure. Okay. Oh, I think Larry wants to respond.
Kathy?
Kathy, this is Larry Konopka. For the very reasons that you have just named, is the reasons that new paragraph F was expanded. The club is at a very crucial and a very sensitive time in the history of the club and in the operations of the club. And meeting with attorneys or meeting with accountants or meeting with architects and engineers, which may be presenting to the club board information which is not finalized, not complete, maybe brainstorming with the board on possible alternative courses of action. I think that is the perfect climate when you're meeting with those types of professionals, that you want to be in executive session, not so much from what the board might say or do, but because the board wants to solicit or elicit as much uncensored or as much open-ended information from these professionals as they can, in order that the board might be ultimately guided in the recommendations that it's going to make to the membership, and the members would have a full understanding of what the board is recommending, because the board themselves would have a full understanding. But just to have that old Article G cover lawsuits that you're involved in, many of these subjects that we're involved in now are very, very sensitive, and I think it would be very much called for that executive session would cover that. Not to short circuit any of the other responsibilities of the board, but to make sure that the board itself was fully informed before it took any action to the next step.
Thank you, Larry. I really appreciate that explanation. And from my perspective, it's just, you're right. We need that consultation. We need to hear that. I just, again, personal opinion, that it needs to be heard in front of an open board meeting as opposed to a closed. Executive session is normally in any Open Meetings Act is for legal counsel and purchasing real estate, so somebody doesn't buy it underneath you or know your low bid. So just my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. We'll definitely talk about that. Okay. Any others for Article 8? Or are we going to move on to Article 9? Okay. Article 9. Okay. Article 10. Wait a minute. really that wouldn't be anything. I would say, are there any other, excuse me?
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, these are all deleted, so.
Right, yeah, I don't have my whole list. Why don't we go through, flip to the next slide. Next
Can we-
slide.
Can we go back to 10? This is Dennis.
So the new 10 obligation?
Yes. No, 10 that's being removed.
Oh, okay.
What's your question, Dennis?
My comments in this area are that over the past years, we have slowly been moving items from the bylaws to the articles. And once they get into the articles, the club member has nothing to say about it. It's just the board can bring it up at one meeting, pass it at that meeting, and that's it. And the members don't even know what's going on with regard to that. And I have a problem with the standing committees being removed to the bylaws, because the bylaws read that the standing committees are committees of the club. And the next 4 or 5 words, and report to the membership. I think the board has treated the committees recently as their committees, and that the committees don't have a responsibility to the membership, despite the fact that our bylaws read that they do. And so I just see a trend here that I don't like, that the involvement of the members in this club is becoming less and less. That's all I have to say.
Dennis, the members can have input all the time. This has been posted. When we did bylaw changes or standing committee changes last year, it's posted, it's discussed at the board meetings. It gets into the meeting minutes. So we're pretty transparent, I think, all the time. And I think if we need to act more nimbly, once it's in a
Plus,
bylaw.
they came out last year.
Yeah, once it's in a
I think-
bylaw,
I
it's a
think
big
we're
deal to
paused.
change. If we put it in a standing committee, we're a little more nimble. We're not going to make changes that aren't appropriate and everybody is in agreement to. And the membership has all kinds of opportunities to weigh in. So we need to be nimble to make our operations flow and be functional. It's just an efficiency. No one's excluding anybody.
Okay, the members have an input to the bylaws with a vote. The members do not have an input to the rules with a vote.
They have plenty of input to the rules.
Pardon?
Members have plenty of input opportunities to talk about and
If they
impact the
can't
rules.
vote on it, then no. In fact, you used the word nimble, that you want to be able to change things quickly and on the fly, and that's what articles allow you to do. And it doesn't say you have to think about this and you can only propose it at an annual meeting. And I just want to bring that to people's attention.
There are points on both sides of that. Dennis I agree with Dennis on the fact that the membership does need access to and what the committees are doing. On the other hand, with things going on, things are going to be happening. Committees have changed. The purpose of the committees has changed over time. Currently, the way things are moving with the club and what's possibly in our future, we don't want to be stuck with a committee and a bylaw, or without a committee because of the bylaws that is going to cause us months of delay if we're have to have something progressing. So there's arguments to both sides of that.
If there's concerns about delay, there is the access to a special meeting.
One of the things I'll add with that too, Dennis and Bill both, is that I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that standing rules used to require 2 meetings, and a while back they switched to one reading. And so I know that that's so that might be an area to look at that would help with both sides, is that maybe it's goes back to, instead of just one reading, more than one reading, and that's a standing rule.
I'm aware of that, Kathy, and I was against that because that says that the articles are not made available to the members. Back then, it took 2 readings. If we had gotten minutes out within a week or 2 after the meetings met back then, that allowed a member to say, oh, I'm interested in that and I have input on that, and Larry's on the board, and I'll see him in the next week and I'll give him my input on that. And it was changed so that it never got out to the members. But there's nothing to, I just want to bring it to people's awareness that the access to people participating in what's happening in this club is slowly disappearing year by year.
I would just make one point here that this particular meeting has been in the signal flags for weeks now and been talked about for much longer than that. And there are, other than board members, about 7 or 8 members on this call.
I see that myself.
Just an observation.
Yes. Thank you.
Angie, you gonna move it along?
Yeah, I have nothing else to say.
Did we lose Andy?
I don't see Angie.
I think we lost her.
Okay, Larry.
Anything on Article 12? Well, it's been deleted, so the content into Article 6, so. Article 13 becomes Article 10, stays the same.
Okay, Larry, I just have a comment on that one, because I know the red line version, you were gonna change it and now you're leaving it the same, which is fine. Because I had talked about that too. The only comment I will make, just so you know, for practicing purposes, is the Vice Commodore does sign payroll checks because he's in charge of the employees. So here it talks about the Commodore and the Secretary of Treasurer, which is our normal practice for any obligations, but payroll checks, I do have the Vice Commodore sign again, just because he's responsible for the employees and want him to see how they're going out. We don't do them all direct deposit. We're probably 50-50. So just for practicing standpoint, so you know that.
Okay, and I guess that could come under your duties as treasurer, being able to delegate some of that.
Right.
Would that be
Yeah.
one of those?
I want to throw that so you know that that's what's going on.
Gotcha.
Sally, Angie just texted. She said, please have Sally chair. So I don't know, Larry.
Oh, hey, I'm willing to give it up, Sal. You got it.
Okay, yeah, I
I was just filling in.
yeah. So Article 13, no other questions, right?
I have one quick question. Maybe this goes to Kathy. Kathy, when we said 2 flag officers sign, and I know in the past, this is probably 2-3 years ago, I was trying to get somebody to get paid and we had to
No
wait
problem.
for someone that
We'll
was
go
out
ahead
of
and finish
town.
up unless you-
So doesn't this make us more efficient if someone's out of town or on vacation, or am I reading it wrong?
The question for my perspective, the change was this said any 2 flag officers.
You
which
are
is the
in
same with
Pittsburgh.
me.
Yeah.
But one of those flag officers should include the treasurer, because you wouldn't want any financial obligation being signed by somebody that wasn't going through the treasurer.
Okay.
So that's why to leave it for just any 2 flag officers,
I
if
see.
you look at it, just for those terms, it would mean, let's just say the secretary and the rear commodore could write a check on the club. And so that's where that discussion came about.
Yeah. And
I
if the
get it.
one of the treasurer's responsibilities is watching the ins and outs it should be the treasurer.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, we'll keep going.
Mhm.
There shouldn't be any questions here. This just changed the number. 12, any questions on amendments?
Well,
Okay. All right, keep going. There was no change here except for the number. Indemnification, any changes here?
Back to members, when we're looking at that, make sure that when we talked about voting members, I think that was the other one that came up, or the other time it came
Oh,
up.
under amendments?
I think it was. I think that was the other time it came up as for a
Okay.
clarification.
Okay, I'll make a note of that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm sure you guys will check that when you go back through for consistency. but-
Yeah, thank you very much.
We're back on, Sally.
Oh, good. You can take
Sorry
over.
about that.
We're on indemnification right now, so that's perfect for you to come on.
Okay. No questions, or did I miss a question, or?
No questions.
Okay.
Does this allow, this indemnification allow for members or chair of the regatta committee to be included in the indemnification?
It's any officer, club members, as long as you meet all of the specifications in here, as we stated, that you're acting according to the bylaws, the standing rules, it's an action, that the board would approve, all of those things. As long as you're acting within the scope of all of these factors, then it would.
Because in the, I read there and I see as a director, an officer, or a member. Now with that, so that would be if the member was, say, chairman of the regatta.
Right.
I look at the two areas where you could be most vulnerable would be regatta and waterfront stations,
It does it definitely, yeah.
where
yeah.
there could be a serious problem.
Mhm.
They're always chaired by members, aren't they?
Well, yes, but I mean, as long as that, as long as you're not hanging that person out because, oh, he's just a member, he's not a director, he's not
Oh,
a,
no.
No, that's why we did, we were thinking of also, the volunteers at, the member dinners, there's lots of
exactly.
different things that can happen.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. Want to move on to the next one then?
I think.
That was deleted. Yeah.
Yeah, I think 18 makes sense because we've already covered it with the new etiquette policy.
Right.
Great, thank you. And then the new 15, club ownership and dissolution. Any questions for Mr. Konopka?
I did have one question on that, and I appreciate the clarification in the changes, listing the not-for-profit. I think that's really important, so I appreciate that. But the affirmative written vote of 2/3 of the voting, present in person or by proxy, and I know we allow proxy for a lot of things that we do in the club. It's in the bylaws for our annual meeting. But for something like this, it seems like it would be more of, I couldn't give my proxy to somebody else. I would have to vote, whether this is voting on a paper ballot or whatever we talk about. It just seemed like I was a little uncomfortable with the proxy, and that's all. I don't know what the answer really is, but that a proxy for something like that seemed possibly.
That's someone's own choice.
With the provision for e-voting now, in this case, I'm with Kathy. That's an interesting point that she brought up about the proxy. All members should be, if the club needs to be dissolved or if that becomes an issue, all members in person, I think I would say 2/3 of the members, period. Because
Bill?
otherwise you have well, you're not talking about a quorum. But I think then, because in that case, I think an effort must be made to contact every member individually and personally, not just, here's a vote kind of thing.
It would just seem like that you wouldn't be necessarily in person. So if we're having this special meeting in, let's say it has to be called in the middle of the winter and you're in Texas and maybe you really want to vote on this as opposed to give somebody your proxy on that vote. It just seems like in this situation and in this environment, we should be able to have some type of either electronic or paper ballots or something like that. And hope, like Larry said, hopefully we never have to get to this ever in our
Right.
history of the club.
As far as Bill and Kathy's comment goes, I hear what you're saying, but for something as serious as dissolution, we want as close to 100% of our members to participate in such a major decision. And with the fact that our membership is from 23 states and the District of Columbia, and with the fact that some members are more attuned to what's going on day to day or month to month in the club than other members are, I think by putting in proxy, it makes it consistent with our annual meetings. It makes it consistent with our other special meetings. I would rather have as many members present in person or by proxy than to just have a small cadre of members present in person. And if this major decision would come up during the winter months, or God forbid, it would come up in the middle of a pandemic or some kind of national emergency, the proxy is still the best way to round up as many of our members as possible. And to give a proxy is not a knee-jerk reaction, Bill. I know if you or I were to give a proxy, we would want to pick someone who we trusted, someone who we knew, and someone that would carry out our instructions before they voted that proxy. A proxy is not a carte blanche. A proxy is a serious responsibility. And so as the person that drafted this language, I feel that it should be left in. Did I convince you?
Well, I'm with you on the one point that the more people in a manner this serious, if it ever, God forbid, got to this kind of point, we'd want more people, not less.
Yeah.
And by using a proxy, you're going to get more. If we had to hold an annual meeting without proxies, and I don't have access to the secretary's records, but the Pentwater Yacht Club and other organizations that I've belonged to down through the years, if it wasn't for proxy, there's a lot of organizations, Bill, that would not have enough people to even conduct business. And for something as important as this, if we should spin our wheels, or if we should fail to carry out a voluntary dissolution following this particular procedure, and yet the club is on the verge of financial collapse or something like that, our creditors can put us into an involuntary dissolution. And
Right.
we certainly would never want that to happen. And so I believe if we were ever faced with this type of a serious crisis, voluntary dissolution is the way to go. And the way that it's worded here, I think is a fair and accurate way to do it.
Well, I think, Larry, what I'm concerned with is not so much the proxy. I think that's fine. But what I'm thinking is, in our annual meetings, what do we typically have? 160, 180, somewhere in there, by in person and by proxy?
That sounds right.
we have 600 some members. That's less than half of the membership that could be saying, let's dissolve the club, when really we should be looking for 400 of our 600 members that would agree to this.
Well, that's why it says 2/3, Bill.
Right. Now, how can we get, but it says 2/3 of the voting members. Oh, okay. Gotcha. I'm with you.
Yeah.
My bad, Larry. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I
Thank
did
you, Bill.
correctly.
At the end of the day, there's only so much we can do to reach out. I mean, we reach out and we get them to act, you know, certainly we want people to
Yes.
act, but
And
But I think
Larry, I just want to clarify that I agree, it wasn't ever, my comments weren't to say present or in person, because we know that that's impossible. And you're right, you're looking at 402 people to be 2/3. But my only point strictly was that you could mail a ballot to each person to be sent back, or electronic voting, as Bill mentioned, by each member, as opposed to collecting proxies. That's all. Because even you might not be able to be in person regardless. I mean, even if you have a proxy, you might not be able to have an in-person meeting.
Thank you for your comments, Kathy. We'll take it under advisement.
Thank you.
and I'm looking at the time.
Larry, you might
so
want to comment that we explored electronic voting and it's not allowed by Michigan law
we're-
for a
Right,
nonprofit organization.
right.
Thank you.
This is Julie Burdick. I just have a general question, not on any of the particular articles. Can I ask one real quick?
I think this would be the last one, because I see that we're after 5 now.
Yeah, I just want to, I sent a letter regarding a proposed bylaw change that I missed the boat on, because I guess I didn't realize we were doing a 5-year review this year. But if a member wants to get the bylaws committee to take a look at a bylaw change for a non-review year, is there a process for that, or do I just keep my letter in the file that I sent? Does that kind of keep it on the burner, or how does that work for future bylaw situations?
Answer that question, Julie. This is Sally. And the bylaws committee does a high level review every year. So if somebody has brought something forward through the committee process, for example, if it has to do with membership, you would bring it to the membership committee. You could request that you have an audience with the membership committee to bring up your recommendation. Then that committee would review that recommendation and determine whether they feel it's appropriate to bring to the bylaws committee. Then the bylaws prepares it to be presented to the board at the annual the membership at the annual meeting. That can occur every single year. The 5-year review is we do what we did this year. We've taken 2 years to go through these bylaws. And we actually reached out to each one of the committees to say, is this exactly what we are doing from a practice standpoint? So that's the process. So to answer your question, yes, you can do it in any year.
So you'll keep that letter on file for me for next year, because there is no committee that handles elections. It's the board, it's the executive officers, it's the club. So I just want that. What's
It's
that?
essentially the nominating committee.
Right.
That
Okay.
is shared by the rear Commodore. So
Okay.
that would be the committee that would be approached for anything that has to do with nominations.
Okay, very good. Thanks.
But yes, to answer your question again, I have your letter and I will definitely keep it, and it will definitely be addressed next year.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Okay,
Thank
Well-
you all for all your hard work.
Thank you.
thank you. I was going to say thank you to all of you who participated. We really, really
Yes.
appreciate the time that you've taken to be here and your questions, and we really appreciate that.
Hey, Angie, you can talk about next steps,
Sure. I mean,
or did I catch you off guard? I can throw it in
Yeah.
there.
What, you want to go ahead, Larry?
So we're gonna have a meeting tomorrow, guys, at 10 o'clock of our bylaws committee, talking about this meeting and the questions and feedback that we received. And then prior to the annual meeting, so you'll be able to see, okay, well, I made a comment about this or comment about that. Did it make the final red lines? So I think we're gonna put together one final report that goes to membership saying, based on the meeting we had today, here are some of the changes we made based on the questions or comments we got back. Is that correct? I think so.
Yes.
Yes.
Just so people know, you know, okay, and I'm sitting there voting now on August 29th. Did anything I say make it to the final version?
Correct.
I think that's good for our members to know that.
Yeah. Very good point, Larry. With that said,
Good job, everybody.
Thank
thank you,
you.
Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa.
Excellent.
And we will conclude this Zoom meeting.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
again, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
All right.